I want to remind you, last month we started our 4 system overviews with the wastewater division. Today we're going to give you a comprehensive report out on our gas division, and I'll recognize Mike Boland and Gabe Bolus to do today's presentation, but let me deviate a little from the introductions. A month ago, Gabe Bolus's title would have been Manager of Energy Systems Engineering. Today it's Electric Engineering because we have a new gas manager, and I recognize Jeff Myers. We welcome him from the city of Philadelphia. He was head of their engineering and their gas division at the Philadelphia Gas Company, so we're very happy to have him here. We thought it would be nice not to make him do a gas system presentation his first month working here. So Gabe has agreed to do that portion of the presentation. I'll recognize Mike and Gabe.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, today it's my intention to try to address a few aspects of the gas system. And the agenda being, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the system. I want to talk about the regulations that surround the natural gas industry and their impact on the division. I want to talk about system growth. While we're not growing now, we have historically, and it's really affected things. Ultimately, Gabe is going to follow up my presentation and talk a little bit about what strategic project that's underway now, and it's part of the 5-year plan going forward. So with that, let me get started here. KUB's gas system goes back a long, long time. In fact, started in 1854, which was prior to the Civil War. I've actually seen some pictures during the Civil War. The gas system was torn down and part of the pipes dug up and turned into cannonballs and that kind of stuff. So the gas system has been around for well over 150 years. Over the time frame, was bought and sold a couple of times. Ultimately, KUB took title to the system in 1945. And all that time frame during which the gas system was going, it was not natural gas that we know today. It was gas that was manufactured, and it was made out of coal. If you take coal and you heat it up without it being in oxygen, that is, you vaporize coal but not into the air, it doesn't burn, it sort of turns into a gas. The same thing really occurs with wood and other things, but the gas that comes off the coal is flammable. That's called manufactured gas. That's the kind of gas we had until 1950 when natural gas made its way to Knoxville. Since that time, what we all think of as a gas system is now natural gas that's associated with petroleum products, not coal. Looking at a few old pictures, the upper picture there is a picture of the old gas works, coal plant, where manufactured gas was made. And not only was the gas made out of coal, you used coal to heat it to make the coal. So it was really a coal process. It was a very industrial-oriented process. There's a lot of chemistry involved, and the output primarily was very low BTU, quality, very low quality sort of gas. Lower pictures, you can see a picture of the old style installation of the pipe. You can see all the joints in the pipe right here that you wouldn't find today. And on the right-hand side is the picture of the pipe actually coming into Knoxville from the interstate pipeline. Very big change for the system here. So just a little bit of history of the system. As we said today, this is a representation of our system today. The gas system serves Knox County, the totality of Knox County. We don't have service in the whole area just yet. We go where the customers are. But the service territory of the gas system is in Knox County. We're served by a natural gas pipeline, East Tennessee Natural Gas. It comes into Knox County right about here, which is roughly the intersection of Pelican Parkway and Melton Hill Lake. The pipeline comes over right about there. It then transverses the county to right here, which is basically Topside Road, Alcoa Highway, right where we enter into Blount County. And it exits the county over here, which is roughly by Chapman Highway, right about where Seymour is. So the county, the pipeline bisects the county like this. We have a series of high pressure lines, one that loops all the way around from point to point, these yellow points being where we take gas. We take gas from the pipeline to 2 major points. We have a system that loops all the way around from point to point, that provides access to our system, going both directions, feeding both into the system and then out of the system. Like there's also another high pressure line that comes right into downtown Knoxville. All the little yellow lines you see in here are the actual distribution pipes that be in your neighborhood and on your street. So that's a representation of our system right there. Right now we have close to 100,000 customers, and as Ms. Auditor just said, we've got a peak day capacity of about 160,000 decatherms and an actual peak sales today of about 120,000 decatherms. A little bit of history. Let me switch gears now and talk about a different aspect of the gas system, which is the fact that the gas system is very highly regulated. The first regulation that came down was in 1970. Prior to that time, the gas systems like ours and others were all regulated, if you will, by best practices to some extent. In 1970, that changed with the passage of the Pipeline Safety Act. And since that time, and even more recently, there's been more and more regulations that have come down. To a large extent, regulations are formulated in response to various incidents that occur out in the domain. And they've taken different forms over time. For example, the control room management program. That's a regulation that dictates how long your employees can work in the control room, the number of hours. There are regulations that establish the drug testing requirements for our employees. There are regulations that establish the training that they have to undergo in the way they are certified to do their jobs. And more recently, the most recent regulation is the Distribution Integrity Management Program, or what we refer to as DIMP, the DIMP program. The DIMP program is a new and different type of regulation. In the old days, the regulations that came out would say, you will do this, and after you've done it, you're good. In other words, you could say, you need to survey your system for leaks twice a year and report your findings. And as soon as you did that, you checked off, I've done it, and you're good. Under the DIMP system, the idea there is for you to go figure out what it is you need to do, figure out how to do it, and then report back your results. In other words, the onus of whether or not you've done sufficient work is not a checkbox. I did this, check. It's, did you investigate your system? Do you know enough about your system? Are you able to demonstrate to the regulator's satisfaction that what you've done is correct? So it puts the onus from a checklist type mechanism onto a proof type mechanism that we've done what we need to do. That's a new regulation that's still being, I guess, felt throughout the industry. And a lot of it has to do with us knowing a whole lot about our system and knowing what our risks are and taking steps to address those. There are other regulations that are likely to be coming down. There's always something in the works. Every time a new regulation comes down, it has an impact on our system, and we respond accordingly. So it's a very, very highly regulated system. The other aspect of the gas system you've got to talk about, that for a couple of decades there, that's all we talked about, was the system growth. If you go back in time and remember, the gas system started in the 1850s. For over 130 years, we wound up with roughly 500 miles of pipe. Then starting in the mid-80s through the early 2000s, the gas system grew by almost fivefold. That may not be a lot if you're selling iPads in your Apple, but for a utility to grow fivefold in 20 years is just a phenomenal rate of growth. And it has impacts that we'll talk about a little later, what that means for us managing our assets. But over that period of time, again, if we'd been around this board meeting, then every meeting we would be talking about how do we meet the growth. What came went away. The last graph showed it in one way. I'm showing it in a different way now. But we're growing at a rate of 10% or so a year, varied by years. It started falling off after the first, I guess, stock market deal in 2001, ticked back up again right before the recent recession. And then you can see we actually had negative growth more recently as the economy really contracted. Going forward, our projection of our customer additions as well as the financial models associated with that has what I would call a more normal growth pattern for utility, which is basically, in our case, with a fairly limited service territory, about 1% a year. So a lot of growth to no growth to more traditional growth. So big changes on the growth side. And again, hopefully I'll wrap it into what all that means here in a little bit. Switching gears once again, let's talk about what the gas system is made of. If you go back in 1972, 40 years ago, what was our pipes made of? Our pipes consisted primarily of low pressure coated steel, cast and ductile iron, and bare steel. There was a little bit of polyethylene at that time, or plastic pipe, but primarily the system was what I would call older materials. Starting in the 70s, not coincidentally about the same time regulations came out, the gas system started with some fairly significant replacement programs. The first one was to replace the uncoated steel. Next, copper services, we replaced pipeline casing upgrades. For the last 30 years or so, we've been working on replacing the cast ductile iron pipe. That's supposed to be, should be finished in a couple of years, in 2015. After that, we'll move to our low pressure steel pipe. While we have it on the chart here and listing all these things, I think it's more dramatic to think about it when you look at it year by year. This is actually the replacement history of our cast ductile iron pipe. And you'll see that we started out with almost 160 miles of pipe when we started the program. And now, as we're towards the end, we've got about 8 miles, 10 miles left to be replaced over the next 18 months or so. The only way you can get 160 miles of pipe replaced is to do it methodically, systematically, consistently. The idea that you can make progress on replacement programs on a start, stop mode just doesn't work. All these programs that was on the previous slide, whether it was uncoated steel mains or cast ductile iron, are all programs that have to be multi-year long, multi-year funded, multi-year thought about. And that's one thing that's really consistent among all of our utility systems, is everything's a long-term investment, long-term outlook. Now the benefit, and the reason you're going after all these replacement projects, is the significantly reduced leak rate. If you go back in time and look at our leak rates per mile, per 100 miles of main, you'll see it's dramatically decreased. Just over the past decade, we've cut the leak rate on our system in half, going from 11 down to 5. So the proof's in the pudding, if you will, and the benefit of all the replacement programs that we are undertaking is shown fairly dramatically right here on this graph. Now, tying stuff together a little bit here, this graph shows all the materials in the pipeline main system over time. We start back in 1972. This is the same chart that I showed earlier in a pie. Now it's in a bar. Primarily, there's the red here is cast and ductile iron. The light blue here is low pressure steel. On top here is the uncoated steel. So if you have the combination of the systematic replacement programs over the last 40 years, plus the dramatic growth in the system, you'll see that the overall material of the system has changed very, very dramatically. For example, starting with 1972, the yellow on top, which is the bare steel, I reported the first program we worked on was the elimination of the bare steel. You can see by 82, most of the bare steel and copper were gone. It wasn't much later than that, we started on an effort to reduce and eliminate the cast ductile iron. That's the red. You'll notice the red over time getting smaller and smaller to where in 2012, last year, we had just a sliver left, and all that will be gone in a couple of years. After that, we intend to start replacing our coated low-pressure steel, and that's the blue, and you'll see that, the light blue, you'll see that over the next 10 years, we look to have that reduced, so that ultimately, by 2030, we'll have a pipeline system that's 100% polyethylene pipe and high-pressure steel, high-pressure coated steel. That's where we're headed with this. So the combination of the combination of the history of growth and the sustained 40 years effort toward replacement programs has materially changed the system, materially increased the safety of the system, and the reliability of the system as well.
What's the life of the polyethylene?
Well, we'll talk about that.
Before you do that,
Yes,
can
ma'am.
you tell me what, in what situations the high-pressure coated steel is more appropriate than the polyethylene?
Yes, the polyethylene has a pressure rating depending on the pipe. We don't run it more than 60 pounds. High-pressure steel can run 200 to, well, depending on the grade, you can run 600 pounds. We don't currently have anything over 200. We'll likely have something around 400. So it's a capacity issue. That's what it is. Chair Anderson asked about polyethylene, the life of polyethylene pipe. Now that we're 90+% relying on polyethylene pipe, let's spend a little bit of time talking about it. If you look at the polyethylene pipe in our system, here's the history of the installation of that pipe. And the history of the installation of that pipe is a representation of the growth spurt that we endured, for a better word, over a couple of decades there. We were putting 100 miles plus of pipe in the ground a year at one point in time. Very, very dramatic. And that piece of, that pipe is fairly new, if you will, in the world of pipe. And we actually brought one here with us. You can hand that, pass that around, Gabe. I thought the question would come up. So here's a piece of polyethylene pipe. That's a piece of pipe that was dug into that happens from time to time. What I want you to know, to look at on that piece of pipe is look at the manufacturer's mark on it. If you look at the manufacturer's mark on it, you'll see that piece of pipe, it runs on every piece of pipe. There's markings. That piece of pipe was manufactured in November of 1973. That pipe was dug into. We had to repair the leak. We cut that out. There's the piece of pipe. There is nothing wrong with that pipe other than somebody dug into it. And that piece of pipe is 40 years old. The reality is the industry is making a guesstimate on how long the polyethylene pipe's going to last. The suggestions are somewhere between 50 and 100 years, but that's yet to be determined, I suspect. So for our intents and purposes, we drew another line on here at 60 years. We said, well, what if the pipe lasts 60 years? What do we need to be doing? What this represents is, let's pick a year here, 75. In 75, we put this pipe in 1975. The pipe lasts, in theory, 60 years. In help me with my math here, Gabe, 1935, I guess. 1935, we would need to replace that pipe. So this is the installation time frame. This is the replacement time frame, in theory, if the pipe lasted 60 years. So we would be facing the same type of accelerated replacement cycle in the future, the same way we did on the installation side, which is not ideal. A more planned approach would be to levelize that over time. Again, just like with all the other replacement efforts we've undertaken, a systematic, methodical, planned approach makes more sense than an approach where you're ratcheting up and down so dramatically. But the red line there is used to illustrate what kind of replacement program it would take to replace the same amount of pipe as the black line. In other words, the area underneath the red line is the same as the area underneath the black line. You've just stretched it out over time, and you've levelized it. That's a potential replacement program for the polyethylene pipe. The reality is we're not sure because we don't know how long the pipe's going to last. But let me also point out, if we look at the dates here, you see the start date here is 2030, and we're sitting here in 2013. We've got a little bit of time to think about this before we actually have to get involved in this. And we talk about that a little bit more. If you look at what we're doing on our replacement programs right now, we're spending about $4 million a year, and have been spending about $4 million a year replacing cast ductile iron pipe for the past 20 years or so. And we're replacing about 8 miles a year. That's fixing to be finished. We'll then be moving into replacing our coated low-pressure steel pipe for the next 15 years after that. We'll be spending about the same amount of money a year as well on that, about $4 million a year. Budget stayed relatively constant for that time frame. We'll be able to replace a whole lot more pipe of the low-pressure steel than the cast ductile iron. Cast ductile iron that's left in the system right now is in Chapman Highway. It's on Western Avenue. It's big pipe. It's in big roads. The low-pressure steel will be replacing going forward. It's primarily smaller pipe. It's primarily in neighborhoods. We can get more pipe replaced for the money. So we'll move right into replacing the steel. After that, if you were to do that line that I drew in the previous chart, polyethylene, all of a sudden you'd have to jump up there to start replacing 30 miles a year. But the truth of the matter is, I don't know when we need to start doing that. I don't know the timing. I don't know how much it's going to cost. I don't know the rate at which we need to be doing that. And honestly, it's not because of us. It's because I don't think the industry knows just yet. As time goes by, the industry will figure out how long the pipe's going to last, what the replacement rate needs to be, and how much it's going to cost. For our planning purposes, in our financial models, in our 5-year plans, there are no costs associated with replacing polyethylene pipe. That's for a future budget, for future years, for future planning. But it is something that's going to have to be dealt with sometime in the future. You know, whether it's 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades from now, a future KUB board and staff will have to deal with the history of the rapid increase we saw during the 80s and 90s in the gas system. Now, that covers sort of the base of the gas system. We're highly regulated. We've got a lot of history. We've got a history of aggressive, ongoing replacement programs. We're increasing our safety by decreasing leak rates throughout the system. At the same time, we have been building the backbone of the system, and we continue to look for strategic projects from time to time. This coming budget year, the next couple of years, has within the budget another strategic project that Gabe Bullis is going to talk about at this point.
Thank you. Before I get into that project in a lot of detail, I want to give you a little bit of a history. It sort of ties together. This has been a 60-year plan. So I'm going to start back when Mike referred to the very first natural gas pipe we built in 51. I want to start with that and work our way to today. So you'll see in 1952 we had built our first high-pressure distribution main to the middle of Knoxville. We call it the Knox Lateral. It's still in service today. And we've come off a pipeline that's still in service today. So that's how we looked in 1952. Gas was new. It was in the middle of the town. That was all the growth we had. Fast forward to 72, we started seeing people really want to take natural gas. That's what, in their homes, in their businesses. So we thought, it's nice to have gas in the center, but wouldn't it be better to have it on the end of your system and build toward the middle? In that 20-year period, we added what we call a level road gate station, which is on Level Road. We also added pipes toward the north and the south, Kingston Pipe, towards the Carnes area. We also added a gate station, as we refer to as Simpson Road. Mike talked about it a little earlier. It's in our eastern part of our system and allowed us to extend a large amount of main up John Spear Highway, Forks of the River area, and Boyd's Bridge Pike. So this was a major, significant, as Mike referred to, we started seeing growth. We started seeing people wanting more gas. This allowed us to transport gas across our system at higher volumes, get it back to their customers at a much more reliable rate. Next 20 years, a little bit slower growth. you know, it was, as you notice, the natural gas pipeline is in the southern part of our system. Well, to go north, we got to move our system northerly. So you see we added on this section, we call it the belt line, head up towards Tazewell Pike, Washington Pike area as the system grew that direction. And as you see a kind of a theme here, if you step back and look, you start to see we're starting to move all of our pipes to the north. Well, in 1999 and 2000, we added a pretty significant addition. We added what we call the North Loop, a 22-mile addition in about a 2-year period to our system. This was a huge, significant addition to our system because it allowed us to tie our 2 gate stations together. So if one needed to be out for maintenance or whatever, we could move gas across our system both directions. It also allowed for a lot of growth, as you can see when I added the distribution mains, allowed the system to grow northerly and kind of fill in that gap. At the same time, UT added natural gas to their campus. We had a little spur came right down through there and came to the UT campus. We had a little bit of growth towards our industrial customers in the center of town. So in 2012, we had 60 miles of pipe that are what we call high pressure distribution main. Now, that leads up to today. We are now looking at a pretty large, significant project, much like the North Loop, but we're going to call the South Loop. And you'll see it pop up right there on this next slide. What we are doing currently, and have started to begin this work, is we have added a new gate station, topside road gate station. And I'll show pictures and describe why and where that's at in a little bit, but that's a significant location for us. We've begun work there and we'll hope to finish up in the next few months. As part of this project, and I'll blow it up a little bit there for you, is that we will extend a high pressure main up through the southern part of our system, tap into the existing lines that we have on Middlebrook Pike, and at the same time build a line towards UT. And the question may be asked, what's driving this? Well, 2 things. The system's still growing. Mike's right. The system hasn't stopped growing. We want to have more redundancy and operational flexibility in our system. We want to make sure that we can have the supplies and demands for our customers. But coincidentally, while we're talking about this, UT shows up and says, can you build us a main to serve more gas in our system? And so that kind of coincided with this project. So what we've got going on is a design to begin building a pipeline to further strengthen our system. So what have we done so far? We have installed, as you've heard probably in previous presentations, we have installed a high pressure main under the Tennessee River. Here's a picture of what it looked like going into the river actually. 16-inch steel. It was a single pool across the river, underneath the river, about 3,200 feet. And it's about 90 feet below the river bed. That's how deep it is. It starts at the Cherokee Farm area and comes up at the UT area near the rugby field, Kingston Pike and Alcoa Highway. This project that we're looking at, as far as the full length of the project, is a 10-mile extension of our system from the south into the Middlebrook Pike area. 8 miles of 16-inch high pressure steel, 2 miles, of 8-inch steel that will go to UT. The topside gate station is $1.4 million and is under construction today. And the line that we talked about earlier, this one right, this line from here to here is a $23 million line. As I mentioned earlier, UT came and approached us about 2 years ago about what can we do to further help us along. We knew we wanted to do this at some point in the future, didn't know when. They're saying, can we contribute to this and help get this built for our system? Of course, we were glad to have a partner in this, and they're willing to invest $9 million in this $23 million project. That contract's been signed, and we are underway with that design. What does it do for UT? It significantly improves the air quality for the Knox County area. UT is one of the top 10 producers of emissions due to their coal burning facility. They burn coal today to make steam. They want to convert that to natural gas. So when this project is completely done, not only will it be KUB's largest customer by a large factor, but it'll be a huge reduction in our emissions in Knox County. They will get rid of a lot of the particulates and greenhouse gases that naturally occur with coal burning, such that it'll be the equivalent of removing 7,000 cars from the roads of Knox County in a given year. So it's a huge project for them along with us. And you see the existing coal stack. If you've been to Neyland Stadium or Thompson Bowling Arena, it's right beside them. They'll be there. That will be out of service at some point. Here's a picture of the new topside road gate station I described earlier. It's actually under construction. This is actually East Tennessee Natural Gas's property. They've had a station there for years. So it made sense to co-locate with them if possible because they already have facilities there. So we worked out an agreement with them a few years ago to purchase and get an easement on their property to build our station. So here's ET&G's facilities. That's where they get that's where their gas flows through onto other counties. Here's KUB's portion, our topside of the gate station that we've actually under construction. We're probably about 4 to 5 months from being complete, so we're significantly underway. We actually had public meetings a couple years ago to make sure the residents around this area were okay with that, what they wanted. Some of the suggestions were build a nice pretty wall. We did that, we're doing that. We're going to, in theory, bury it and hide it. So that's being done significantly. And to give you an idea where I'm at, that's Alcoa Highway. This is Topside Road. So you're right at that point, right before you cross the bridge into Blount County. It's right where this is sitting. And then towards that direction. And so this project's going really well. We are actually extending the pipe from the station, our station, out. And then that pipe will ultimately go north towards UT and Millbrook Pipe. One piece we haven't started just yet is actually tapping the station that ET Natural Gas owns, which is here. We actually have a tap right here that will run across to our system. And that'll be where we take delivery from that gate station. So what's next? What's left? I talked about earlier, we have completed the bore under the river, that 3,000-foot section is complete in the ground. Topside Road is right there, it's under construction, will be done in a few months. So what we've got left to do is to figure out and determine the route between these 2 points. We have just begun what I call a preliminary study, trying to find the best route. We will go with one route. We will either do a west of Alcoa Highway route, or we'll do an east of Alcoa Highway route. It won't be both, it'll be one or the other. And look at the best, least invasive route to look to do that with. Once we determine that route, we'll again have a public meeting, invite the public, those affected by it, and then we'll also come back to the board and present what we're recommending. So we'll be doing that over the next 2 or 3 months. And in parallel, we also have to build the line from where the pipe came out on the other side of the river, north to Middlebrook to tie into our existing Knox lateral, and also build the line to UT to their existing steam pipe. But those can be done in parallel, and those routes are going to be determined also in parallel while we're doing this design.
Okay, if I may, is this a type of construction of a lot of digging and there's no, you don't bore underneath and there's no damages, you have to dig?
It's open cut for the most part. It's a very open cut. Some refer to it as some of the North Loop. There'll be some cross country. You're kind of looking at routes that are more open area, but it'll be an open cut. And there are a lot of companies that do this for a living. This construction, this project will take less than a year once we get the route determined and get all the appropriate paperwork done. But it will be that way.
And does the UT conversion of their plant, is it contingent on us getting the pipeline there, or what's their timetable?
Yes, when we signed the contract, they want to take delivery of gas by November of 2015. So we've got 2 years from actually this next month. So we've got that in contractual agreement, and they're aware of where we're at, what we're doing.
So Gabe, we already have a high pressure mains that run essentially there. Is it just a question of capacity? We just can't meet the capacity?
What they're today is a 6-inch line. It's not able to take the loads they want to have. Right, I guess you're talking about this line right here. Yeah, that runs to UT. That's the case. We need to run a larger diameter pipe to meet their demand, so we can convert that plant fully.
And will it be just for UT, or will it also serve if there was demand in that South Knoxville area? Would it meet that demand?
Right now, it's exclusively for UT. It's for them, and as always, when you see what they actually pull on the load and see what your demands are, I guess things can be discussed, but they're paying for that portion of the pool.
But the red line could provide
Oh,
growth.
yeah. Well, the red line definitely will be for other customers. I'm referring to this little purple spur, I guess we'll call that. Yeah, this line from topside up into our system is meant for everybody. It's built big enough for UT plus our system as a whole to truly give us a 30-inch feed to support the level road and central road gate stations. Tremendous amount of operational flexibility, ability to be able to handle any demands for anybody. the river crossing was completed in October of 2012. It's tested, it's ready to be hooked up to the main system. Phase 2 is the Cherokee campus to the Topside Road, the multi-mile from Topside to the campus. Routing studies are just begun. Public input meeting will be in the next few months with the goal of starting construction by this next summer. Phase 3, which is what I call the purple section up at the top, one going north of Middlebrook, one going east UT. We're looking at the routes there. We have a little more time. Construction will begin in early 2015 with the completion date in November 2015. That's the goal. That's when UT wants to have their plant converted out of the coal business per se and in the natural gas business. Any questions?
And this is known to the public yet?
The Topside Road Gate Station, we made aware of what we're doing. And then of course the river crossing, UT's been fully engaged because it's on their property from point end to end. The next phase is to make the public aware of this and to make this a more public project. We had just not gotten to that point. We really don't have a route to give anybody just yet, but it is going to be a very we'll publicize it quite a bit.
So I was wondering, has the chamber started using this as a marketing tool for growing?
It's a good point. We have not talked to the chamber about that, but they will probably, and when the chamber comes with any new customer, we look at the system as a whole, and so far we've not had a problem meeting anybody's needs. So that's always been a positive for KUB to have the planning we have and the growth we've had and the pipes we've had. But this will definitely be more of a catalyst for that, yes.
We don't push gas or electricity, is that right?
No, we
To the customers?
You mean market?
Market. Do we say, buy this, don't buy that, or?
Oh, as far as one versus the other, no, we do not. We're I guess I use it as fuel neutral, but yes, we'd like for you to take both.
And is the laying of this pipeline, is it as, I was going to say invasive, but disruptive to traffic as some of our other projects?
The routes we're looking at right now, the answer is no. We're not looking at some this size and this is against it's not. We're not looking to put under any major roads or any major. We have crossroads, but we'll not actually be part of a road following. This is more of a find a route that's more backwoods, cross country to get to the point. So that's what we did with Northwood. It was very successful.
It doesn't make much sense for us to put this in the Alcoa Highway area when TDOT's going to come and dig up Alcoa Highway and tell us to move it. So we're going to have to avoid Alcoa Highway for that reason, and thus it will help with traffic and that sort of thing.
Commissioner, the other thing though, this routing, regardless of where we end up, will involve a great number of easements. We will be able to utilize some roadways, some secondary roads in some cases, but by and large, the routing will involve easements. So there will be a number of potential issues associated with that, and we'll be coming back and talking to you all more in the future about easements and easement requirements and the numbers of properties affected and so forth.
And how deep we go with those lines again?
Typically around, under the river it's really deep, but typically 5 to 6 feet buried of depth. So not really deep, but significant enough.
So we had to get to some blasting of some kind too?
In South Knoxville, it's going to be hard to go anywhere without doing some blasting. Yeah.
That's part of the study actually, so that what we can.
Yeah, please.
I go back to Mike. Mike, early on you showed us that growth.
Yes, sir.
And then you showed us the flat.
Right.
So, how much is the same with water? We have a potential, even though we're growing customers, to sell less gas because I know products are getting more efficient. I know in 2015, there'll be new minimums, residential standards for water heaters and furnaces. So, it could be potentially looking at having to invest and really selling less, having to maintain structure, possibly growing customers, although you showed a pretty flat projection there, but less revenue to do it with. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say, and you're not making me feel good about it. It's fair to say about all of our utilities. environment in which we live.
The good news
But I think
is,
the gas and water, we've already experienced that, right?
Yes.
Especially the last few
Yes.
years.
I mean, we've got plenty of experience.
But this UT, the new plant will significantly add to our volume, no matter what.
UT plant will be a very significant customer, a very, very significant.
Is there any benefit in purchasing power because we're gonna need more for UT? Or are we just gonna be a transport for them and they buy from the gas company the same way we do?
At the start, I believe they're buying from us. The truth of the matter is, the way have everything set up, we're indifferent whether they buy from us or they buy from others. They're using our lines. Basically, the amount we charge them is the amount we need to service our lines. So whether the commodity comes from us or somebody else, it's immaterial to us.
You know, our unit margins are equivalent, or whether they're a transportation or a supply customer, cover our distribution system costs.
So what about the things that Sherry showed us, the 1990 something resolution and set capacities or whatever, will those have to be adjusted eventually?
Shouldn't be. The UT load, they're converting from coal to natural gas, but they're also installing some fuel oil backup tanks. So as far as I know, they're going to be interoperable customers. As an interoperable customer on that cold day, we can call them and say, get off gas. And they will be burning fuel oil at that time in their boilers while we're using that capacity that's normally used to serve them, to serve residential customers. So
They are looking to add, on average, we think 7,000 to 8,000 decatherms per day, which is significant, but it won't push us past any of our limits.
To put it in perspective, if there's 7,000 to 8,000 decatherms a day, we average about 30 something. So whatever percent that is.
My last question was on replacing polyethylene.
Yes, sir.
Is there, besides the cost of the material, is there any less expensive to replace it versus ductile iron or whatever? Or it's the same thing, you're digging up pipe and putting something new in?
To some extent, the ductile iron, if you go back in time, the ductile iron was installed in an age in which everything was different. And we've been able to replace some of it by inserting pipe in the old pipe. So you don't have to do as much digging. I don't think we'd have the same opportunity when we start having to replace polyethylene. It will likely either have to be laying down a parallel pipe or just digging up the existing pipe and putting some down. I don't think you'll have the opportunity to insert, if you will, other pipes. So likely be more expensive. That's thought by head.
Any other questions? Thank you, guys. That was very informative. Appreciate it. You too, Sherry. Got any other
That's all we have.
business? Any other business? Anybody signed up to speak? Jeff, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Half
It's very
board,
interesting.
welcome to Knoxville and KUB. And Josh, will you come back and visit us? You don't have to. All right, at this time, we will adjourn, and I'll remind everybody that we will have a lunch session across the hall. It's open to the public, and that the meeting